Okay, the time is 14:27:02. We're now back on the record. This is just to Mr. Pazuchowski's deposition.
We were just talking about the FOIA requests that were... We're talking about the FOIA requests. Now, your office did not disclose or did not share the requested documents with the people that were requesting them, correct?
Right. The city attorney makes that decision, yeah.
So you had nothing to do with that decision at all?
No, the city attorney made that decision.
And that decision was based on the fact that there were some bank records that were included in the report?
No,
Is that what you said before?
what I said is he interpreted it was some type of personal records that he interpreted that he wasn't going to release because he feared being sued by him, and felt when he read the FOIA in regards to, he's our FOIA coordinator also, he made that decision not to release them because he feared that he'd be sued by him for doing that. And in turn, he was sued by not releasing it. Or the city was sued by not releasing it.
He was feared he would be sued by whom if he released them?
Whoever's records those were, I don't recall. I don't know if they were Dave Romain's or somebody's. I don't recall.
No.
Whatever records.
Can't you black out people's names or specific part of records?
As I said, I didn't make the decision as the city attorney. I'm just trying to go from memory when this occurred. So I don't know.
Okay, all right.
He chose not to release it, city attorney.
You've sat here for a number of hours, both testifying and watching Wozniak testify. You've also reviewed a number of reports, and you also have your own memory to rely on. Knowing everything that you know about this case, is there anything that you think should have been investigated further that was not investigated?
I think anything that would be brought forward to the departments that wasn't investigated or could be investigated should be investigated.
I'm talking about existing things, not things that...
I don't recall anything that wasn't... I don't recall.
Again, with the premise on the same things that you know your memory and reviewing the reports, your testimony, Wozniak's testimony, any other preparation that you may have done. Sitting here today, do you believe that she walked into the water and died?
I have no proof of that. Well, yeah, the way you said, I have no proof of that. I don't have any direct evidence of that. I have evidence that that occurred, but not direct evidence. To this day, nobody saw her enter the water, unless you can show me that you saw her enter the water.
Can you tell me, please, what evidence you're relying on when you say you have evidence of that, but no direct evidence?
No, I said
Objection, asked and answered. Twice by my count, maybe 3 times. Go ahead.
Objection is no.
circumstantial evidence, the footprints, the fact, the car, her not being there, the information that was given from the officer, that's it. Okay. And the body recovered out of the water.
Okay. And this is obviously knowing that witnesses came forward and... Well, let me ask you one more thing. Assume for a moment that a witness came forward and said that she saw on the evening of January 12, 2010 at the church, at the St. Paul's Church. Now I'm confusing myself, so I'm going to start this question all over again, unless there's an objection. See, now this binder's not cooperative.
I do not object to you starting the question over again.
Thank you.
And knowing part of your question, I would just suggest that you give us a specific time rather than use the term evening. Otherwise, I'm projecting the form of the question as being vague.
I want you to assume for a moment that a witness came forward and stated that between somewhere in the vicinity of 7:15 and 7:20 on the evening of January 12, 2010, she was in the parking lot of St. Paul's Church and saw a car matching the description of the Lexus have the panic alarm go off, followed by the flashers turning on. Assume that that's the case, that a witness came forward with that information. Would that be something that you think should be investigated further?
Should be documented and investigated further. What would you do? Do you have a license plate on the vehicle? Or?
I'm not asking you. I mean,
Well, for me to investigate further, I need a license plate or a VIN number, or, as I said, the type of vehicles you're mentioning, they're all over the city.
Okay, I'm going to hand you one last thing that I'm marking as Pazuchowski 1. Have you ever seen this document before?
This exact document, I've seen, I mean, we had Crime Stoppers that look similar to this.
And there's a reward of $250,000 being offered?
No, I've never seen it. I've personally never seen it, that I can recall anyway. I shouldn't say that, I don't recall. I've seen that picture because I think we use it on Crime Stoppers.
Did you hear at any point that there was a $250,000 reward being offered?
I don't recall.
Okay. All right, I have nothing further.
I just have a couple of questions, Mr. Pazuchowski, Director. Understanding that you're no longer with the Grosse Pointe Woods Public Safety Department, I still would like to ask you some questions. As far as you know, when you left here, was this still an open case?
Yes.
And no one had closed out the file or made any permanent conclusions about what happened, is that right?
Well, in regards to a missing person, that was closed because missing person was recovered. In regards to the investigation, that remains open.
So is it fair to say that if someone were to come forward with evidence that would substantiate a claim that a crime was committed, the investigation would continue and investigate whatever information came in?
Absolutely.
And it may result in criminal charges, it may not, it would depend on how the investigation proceeded, is that right?
Absolutely.
And so if someone were to allege that there was some sort of a conspiracy to cover up a crime, that certainly would be inconsistent with the notion that if there was evidence presented, the crime of a crime, that would be investigated, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you aware of any evidence of any sort of a conspiracy between any of the named defendants in this lawsuit or any of the public safety officers that used to work for you of a conspiracy to cover up facts or events surrounding the disappearance of JoAnn Matouk Romain?
No.
Were you yourself ever engaged in any sort of activity to cover up the disappearance of Ms. Romain?
No.
Did you do anything in your capacity as director or detective sergeant, whatever the case may be, to cause any special danger to JoAnn Matouk Romain?
Absolutely not.
In fact, did you even know who she was prior to being contacted by Grosse Pointe Farms?
No, I did not.
Had you ever met her before?
No, I did not.
To your knowledge, had you had any contact, social or professional or any-wise with respect to her?
No, I did not.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Sir, I'm assuming that if during your investigation into the circumstances that bring us all here today uncovered any evidence of any of these defendants having been involved in any activities leading to the death or murder of JoAnn Matouk Romain, you would have acted upon those immediately.
Absolutely.
Did you find any such evidence?
Not at this point, no.
Thank you. Nothing further.
I have a couple of questions. Your proper title now is chief or director?
Director of Public Safety.
All right, director. Let me ask you this. Just because somebody makes an accusation that a family member may be a suspect doesn't necessarily mean that they are a suspect, correct?
That's right.
In fact, I imagine there's been cases you've been involved with over your career where you found just the opposite to be true, that family members make unwarranted or unsubstantiated allegations about another family member out of spite and hate, correct?
Absolutely.
And that could be present in any particular case, could it not?
Yes.
And now you were asked questions relative to the Canadian medical examiner, Dr. Marvin, M-A-R-V-E-N, Oxley, and you said you met with him, you were at the hospital when the autopsy was present, correct?
I was there after the autopsy.
Okay. But you did talk to him and he gave you his opinions and conclusions about the manner and cause of death in this case, did he not?
Yes, he did.
And isn't it a fact that it was his opinion and conclusion that there was no evidence of foul play?
Correct.
In other words, it was his opinion and conclusion there was no evidence that a crime was committed.
Correct.
And medical examiners are an important part of an investigative process when a body is recovered because there's physical evidence from the body that they can derive and study to make a determination as to whether or not there was any kind of indication of a crime, correct?
Correct.
As a matter of fact, they're very important cases to prosecutions of murder or attempted murder, etc., when you've got that type of a situation present, correct?
Correct.
So in your opinion, strike that, you would agree that with the proposition that Dr. Oxley's experienced medical opinion that there's no evidence of a crime is pretty substantial evidence in this case, is it not?
Yes.
Because if there was evidence of crime, he would have noted that in his autopsy, correct?
Correct.
In fact, there are other autopsies performed on the decedent's body subsequent to Dr. Oxley's autopsy, correct?
Yes.
And it's also a fact, is it not, that none of those autopsies uncovered any evidence of any crime being committed, correct?
Correct.
Now, I want you to assume for a moment that my client, Timothy Matouk, is going to testify in this case that on date and times in question, he was working for the Harper Woods Police Department as a detective and was assigned to the Michigan State Police Comment Unit. You're familiar with that unit, are you not?
Yes, sir, I am.
And I also want you to assume for a second that there will be fellow officers on that same unit that my client was on the date and time in question, who are going to offer testimony in this case that Mr. Timothy Matouk was with them during the hours of, I think, 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock that evening, or maybe a little bit later, at all times relevant to the disappearance of JoAnn Matouk Romain. I want you to assume that this testimony is going to come into evidence, okay? That would be a significant piece of evidence as it relates to whether or not Mr. Timothy Matouk was involved with the disappearance and or death of the decedent in this case, would it not?
Yes.
And I understand that you know Mr. Matouk through your professional dealings, correct?
Yes.
He's not a personal friend of yours, right?
No.
Right. You've always used the term professional relationship, which means any contact and discussions and communications you've had with Timothy Matouk has been solely in his capacity as a member of a police department or a police force, correct?
Yes.
And during all those dealings with Mr. Matouk, Mr. Timothy Matouk, is it a fair statement you always found him to be professional?
Yes.
Honest?
Yes.
A man of integrity?
Yes.
A man that was ought to do the right thing in terms of justice and carry out his job?
Absolutely.
And isn't it also an important part of an investigation to determine who the person's character is if they're deemed a suspect by a family member?
Yes.
All right, so when Michelle Romain comes forward and she identifies Mr. Timothy Matouk as one of 4 suspects, you also take into consideration your own personal dealings with Mr. Matouk as a fellow professional, do you not?
Yes.
And that weighs into the equation as to whether or not and to what extent you're going to investigate him, correct?
Yes.
And that was part of the process involved in this case, was it not?
Yes.
And as you sit here today, you would agree that you absolutely have no evidence of any kind that Mr. Timothy Matouk was involved in the disappearance or death of JoAnn Matouk Romain, correct?
I do not.
And you do not have any evidence that Mr. Timothy Matouk was involved in any manner or method conspiring with your officers of the Grosse Pointe Woods Police Department and or any officers from the Grosse Pointe Pharmacy Police Department to conceal any means or manner of Ms. Romain's death, correct?
Correct.
And similarly, you have no evidence that Mr. Matouk in any way took some sort of affirmative action which created a risk that the decedent would be exposed to an act of violence by a third party, correct?
Correct.
These are allegations in this complaint, this civil suit, which I presume at some point you probably read, correct?
Yes.
All right. And I'm going over these allegations for there's a reason for this, sir, and that is because as you sit here today, after many years and reflecting back on it, there is no evidence that you're aware of that substantiates any allegations I've just gone over with you, correct?
Correct.
Right. And last but not least, there's no evidence that you're aware of that Timothy Matouk willfully or maliciously acted in any manner that caused or contributed to the death of JoAnn Matouk Romain, correct?
Correct.
Right. Nothing else.
When Mr. Pizer was asking you questions, I believe he asked you if Dr. Oxley's report concludes that a crime had not been committed. And you said yes, right?
That's what he said.
Okay. Now,
Just for the record, my question was on his opinion, not his report.
That was verbal, wasn't it?
there's no question. Now, by Dr. Oxley indicating that there was no evidence of foul play, in your mind, does that mean that he's concluding that there's no evidence of a crime?
That's what he told. The reason why I came up is I asked for a copy of the report, and he told me you will not get a copy of the report. I said, why won't I get a copy of the report? He said, it'll go to the family because there's no evidence of a crime.
No evidence of a crime, that's what he told you, no evidence of a crime. Right?
Yeah.
Now, you're aware that Dr. Jensen, Jeffrey Jensen at the University of Michigan also did an autopsy,
Yes.
right? And he discovered that there were contusions located on the left upper arm. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And contusions can be caused to somebody through a criminal act, right?
Yes.
So would you say that Dr. Jensen's report, or Dr. Jensen's autopsy report, suggests that a crime may have been committed?
No, he suggested that there's a bruising there, correct?
Contusion, you was at 3.
Being at the scene of where he went into the water with the cement base and everything else, the first thing I thought when I read that was that falling in, she probably hit her shoulder and caused a bruising going in there and just in the water because she'd still be alive at that point. So
falling into what?
If she actually went into the water at that location.
If she went into the water and then fell down, there would be a contusion on her left arm.
Because according to the Colombo, there was what appeared to be a butt print where she slid down and fell down. So I would think she could have fell back, hit her shoulder, went in the water, hit a rock, anything. There's all kinds of reasons why she could have had bruising there.
She could have been hit, right?
I'm just telling you first thing I thought when I read that.
Did you ever ask any of her family members if her left arm also happens to be the arm that she carries her purse on?
No.
You think that's an important thing to know, especially if the purse was ripped?
I didn't think they asked that, no.
Okay, all right, I have nothing further.
Sir, during your investigation, when you spoke to Michelle Romain or any of the other immediate family members, did any of them mention anything about JoAnn being paranoid?
I do recall her being extremely paranoid and afraid and feeling somebody was out to get her. She wouldn't say who at times throughout, I don't know how long. Different people that we interviewed said the same thing. There were some actions that she was acting paranoid, yes.
At any point in time, did any of the family members ever mention to you or to any members of your department that you became aware of subsequently that there was a family history of paranoia in this family?
Yes, I recall as 6 years ago, I do recall a comment being made.
Do you remember what that comment was and who made it?
It was the Palazzola family.
Mrs. Palazzola?
Yeah, I think about it was either a grandfather or...
Likewise, mention anything about a family history of schizophrenia?
I recall something in regards to that.
And to the best of your recollection, it may have been JoAnn's father that suffered from this type of mental or one of these types of mental disorders?
From what I can recall.
Thank you, sir.
Nothing else. I'm sorry.
Are you aware of whether or not Palazzola is very close friends with Mr. Tim Matouk?
No. No.
Would that be a fact that you would find of interest if Palazzola is the one giving information to investigating officers that she suffered from this paranoia?
The interview, from what I can recall, was very early. I thought it was very early in the investigation. And even at that time, I don't know who was pointed out as a possible suspect. Interviewing Palazzola, none of that came out. They didn't accuse anybody. We were there obviously just to find out if they had any ideas where she may have been. I don't remember exactly how that even came out when she started talking about that family history.
One last thing I wanted to ask you about was Did you or anybody at your department ever follow up with a Paul Hawk?
I don't know who Paul Hawk is, personally.
Do you know if his...
So Keith Wozak, Detective Wozak would know that if he was somebody that was interviewed.
Do you know if his written statement was ever supplied to the Grosse Pointe Woods Police Department?
No, I do not know.
Okay. All right, thank you. I have nothing further.
Oh, I thought of one area I wanted to ask you about, Director, if I could. I asked some questions earlier of Mr. Wozak about the contact from the bank. Were you involved in any follow-up investigation regarding the family going to the bank with Rose Matouk?
I went to the bank with Detective Wozak and also to Rose Matouk's house.
Tell us what you learned when you did that.
Well, I know she was very upset about what occurred and was very concerned about how much of the information was truthful or not in regards to withdrawing the $200,000 from her account. And that's why apparently she had second thoughts and would not do that. I asked her if she wanted, because St. Clair Shores Police was involved in this part, to see if there was any crime that was committed, any false pretenses or fraud or anything like that. I asked her if she wanted that investigated at all, and she said, no, absolutely not. Not with family. I'll deal with it my own way. That's all that I can recall.
Okay. Did you follow up, or do you know if Wozak followed up on any of the claims that Michelle made about this Pipia person being somehow someone who was owed money or new information that might come out if certain monies were paid?
Yeah, it's from what I can recall or remember, it was confusing to Rose because initially when she was talking, it came out as though they needed them, like they knew where she was and they needed this $200,000, and this would get her out. And that's why we went over there so quickly, because we thought, there's information, we know where she is, she's being held somewhere, and nobody called us, nobody informed us. Are you kidding me? So we flew over there, and then we found out that it just wasn't true. And then I questioned, well, why would you have to take this money out for ransom if she isn't being held? So anyway, she was upset about it, but didn't want any further investigation. So we told St. Clair Shores that there'd be no follow-up with them, and they were fine with that, and that was the end of the case.
And certainly, if there was some sort of conspiracy going on to prevent or hide facts from coming out surrounding her disappearance, going right over to Rose Matouk's house after you learned this information would certainly be inconsistent with the notion of a conspiracy or a cover-up, correct?
Correct.
That's all I have.
I have one other question. You were asked questions about whether or not Timothy Matouk took a polygraph examination, and you indicated, if I understand the chronology as to what happened, that given the professional relationship you had with not only Mr. Timothy Matouk, but Bill Matouk, you turned over that part of the investigation to Michigan State Police. You asked them to follow up on that.
Yes.
That's correct, right?
Yes.
Right. Because you didn't want to present any kind of conflict of interest. You wanted to have a fair and impartial investigation as it relates to those two individuals, right?
Absolutely.
So when you testify that you have an understanding that Mr. Timothy Matouk refused to take a polygraph test, do you know whether or not that in fact is true, that he did refuse? Or aren't you certain?
I can't recall.
Okay. All right, so it's not that he didn't refuse, that he did refuse, it's just that you don't know what his response was, if any, correct?
Unfortunately, because it's 6 years ago, I can only recall.
All right. So if Mr. Timothy Matouk were to testify in this case, he was never requested by the Michigan State Police to take a polygraph, obviously his testimony would be more indicative of that situation rather than your understanding.
Absolutely, I could not deny that.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Do you recall what MSP told you when you asked them to interview Tim Matouk?
No, that's what I'm having I can't, you mean in regards to after they called him?
Is it possible that the first time you reached out to them and said, hey, can you interview Tim Matouk, they said, no, we're not going to do that?
No, absolutely not.
That's not what happened, right?
No, it's...
There's no way that...
State Police, only thing they refused to do is to take over the case. They weren't going to be involved in the case. They would assist us in any way possible. They would never do that to us.
Oh, so they said that they would not take over the entire case. Did you ask them to take over the entire
No,
case?
but what I'm saying is the state police won't take over a case, but they'd be willing to assist any agency. The only time they get involved in taking the case is if it's involved in another officer.
Okay, so it's not possible that when you first talked to JoAnn Powell that she told you, no, we're not just going to interview one person unless we're taking over the whole case.
No, that's what I'm saying. They wouldn't take over the case. I didn't need her to interview him. I needed her to talk to him about, is he willing to take a polygraph, to speak to him.
So you asked her specifically if they'd be willing to
She was willing to sit in on an interview if you wanted her to sit in on an interview, if he's willing to come
interview
in on
or a
an interview.
polygraph.
Well, let him finish, please. You're talking
An
over.
interview or a polygraph, right?
Well, she would have to just ask and see if he wanted to take a polygraph. Then it would go with the polygraph operator.
And you're sure she didn't tell you right then on the spot, no, we're not just going to interview him or polygraph
I
one
don't
person?
recall that.
Okay.
I'd be surprised because I've worked with her for a long time. I just
Did you or any other officers who were interviewing Rose try to pressure her to press charges?
No, I asked her if she wanted this investigated through the St. Clair Shores in regards to false pretenses or fraud.
So
And she says, no, I'm going to handle it my own way. Their family, I'm not doing that. I said, fine. St. Clair Shores called us. They had a case. We had to decide if they were going to investigate. We needed to show them, no, the victim does not want this investigated. So I had to know that information. I told her that.
I thought she was a victim of what?
If she was a victim, because the reason why we got the call, they thought there was a fraud. They were trying to get her to withdraw $200,000 from her personal bank account. The bank called, they believed it was a fraud. The police department then called us. And she chose to end it there. It was done. That was it.
Okay. So in theory, if she would testify that officers were trying to pressure her into pressing charges and that she continuously and continually refused to, that's not your recollection of what happened, right?
That's not true.
Okay, all right, thank you. I have nothing further.
No more questions.
Thank you, sir.
All done.
Alrighty.
Sir.
Okay.
The time is 14:54. That concludes the deposition.